Chapter 4. James Edwards sat on one of the Seen Better Days plastic chairs in Interrogation 1. So far, his expectations about this meeting had been fulfilled, in spades. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and unwashed criminals, even though smoking in the building had been against the rules for a couple of years now. Stinky perps weren't covered by departmental policy. Too bad. Across from the young cop was the inspector from IAD, the Shoofley as regular cops like to call them. They were called other names too, but most of them couldn't be used in polite company. Not that polite company was apt to gather in this rat hole of a room. The inspector said, "Two sets of eyelids? You mean he blinked with both eyes?" "No, sir. I mean he had one set, and then he blinked with another set. Inner and outer lids, sir." The fat sergeant said, "Kind of like low beams and high beams?" Edwards glared at the fat sergeant, one of the two uniforms who'd been behind him when he'd started chasing the perp, whatever the hell he was. The inspector from Internal Affairs cleared his throat. "Let's move on, shall we?" He glanced down at the written report, shuffled the papers, considered his next words carefully. Was there anything else strange about the deceased suspect? Other than he must have been training for the Olympics, this guy was the fastest thing on 2 feet I've ever seen. He was wearing regular street shoes, too. "What size were they?" the sergeant said. The inspector said, "You two want to bottle the byplay so we can get this thing finished?" "Yeah, I hear you," Edwards said. "Sir." "So, Officer Edwards, did these eyelids come out before or after the perpetrator drew the weapon that vanished in a puff of smoke when you hit it?" Snide suckered this guy. He didn't need to be sarcastic. "Before." Inspector Shoofley glanced over at the fat sergeant and Phillips, the other uniform. Said, "And why is it, do you think, that these two officers did not see these, eyelids and goofy handgun?" "Because they were coughing their smoked-up lungs out 5 blocks behind me, that's why. They didn't get any closer to him than I am getting to my gold shield." A long beat passed. "Sir." The fat sergeant rolled his eyes. "Ah, Jimbo Edwards, light years ahead of the rest of us, all by himself. That right? You aren't half the man I am." "That's true. You gotta outweigh me by a couple 100 pounds. Listen up, Edwards. You ever think that it might be possible that on the entire force there could be 1 or 2 guys besides you who aren't complete fools?" What seemed like a long time passed. "Edwards?" "I'm still thinking about it." "Smart mouth. Just get up and see where it gets you. Just remember that next time you need backup." "I was remembering it this time, Sarge. My backup was way, way back, probably thinking about their next donut and cigarette." The fat sergeant flushed. Must have hit close to home, Edwards thought. The other uniform spoke up. Look, Inspector, I just remembered why I didn't notice the guy's eyelids. I was too busy staring at those little antennae coming out the top of his head. I think he was sending signals to Mars to start the invasion. That's what I think. We should put in a call to the president, you know." The sergeant laughed. The inspector frowned. "I think we are about done here." He closed his notebook, shook his head. "Sergeant, I'd like to speak to you and Officer Phillips outside, please." He got up, nodded at Edwards, headed for the hallway that led to the squad room. He stopped in front of the one-way mirror, paused and looked at himself, straightened his tie. As he was leaving, the Sarge said, "Listen up, Jimbo. You want to get along, you got to go along. You need to cut out all this cowboy stuff. Try to be a team player." "This team makes the Jets look good," Edwards said. For a second, it looked as if the fat man might swing on him, but he held it down. Cops hitting other cops was very politically incorrect these days, no matter how much you might want to do it. After they were gone, Edwards slumped in his chair. Man, this was crazy. Guy with 2 sets of eyelids able to climb walls like a human fly? Maybe this was all a bad dream. Maybe somebody had slipped some acid into his coffee. Okay, so the guy was some kind of freak or something. He'd seen that show on the Nature Channel or Discovery or PBS or somewhere about those people in Spain or Portugal who only had 2 toes and 2 fingers on each hand. Double dactyl or something like that. And there was the dog-faced boy and human alligators and fat ladies. Had to be a stronger people than one who could run like the wind and who had eyes like a frog or snake or something. And who carried humming ray guns that shattered when you hit them hard. Probably all them superconductors. So how to explain all those things? Maybe it was like a Star Trek episode. Some weird space tornado kicked the Enterprise back in time, like it did every other week or so, and this guy was part of the crew, or running from the crew. Yeah, right. He closed his eyes, feeling exhausted. Stuff like this wasn't supposed to happen. Way it was supposed to go was the bad guys would do crime and he would catch them and throw them in the cage. Wasn't supposed to be stuff this weird happening, even in New York City. Man, he was tired. All that running, then having IAD hammer away at him for what seemed like forever. Maybe he'd just rest his head on the scarred table for a minute. Almost before he knew it, Edwards found himself drop off into sleep. He awoke when somebody touched him on the shoulder. He jerked, spun away from the touch. A pretty good-looking woman in a lab coat stood there looking at him. What? He died and this was his reward? Well, not bad, not bad. Officer Edwards? Yeah. I'm Laura Weaver, Deputy Medical Examiner. You sent us over a corpse this afternoon? I didn't send him over, Doc. He sent himself. Whatever. Can you tell me something about it? I mean, its background? It? She looked around, leaned closer to him. She looked tired too, like maybe she'd been dragged out of bed and was 6 hours shy of a good night's sleep. Yeah, well, I did a quick prelim, opened it up, and let me tell you, I've never seen anything. She chopped off her words as the door to the interrogation room swung open, and Harriman, the Polish detective, peered in. Somebody here to see you, James. Edward shook his head. Now what? Harriman moved off. The doctor said, Listen, I don't want to talk about this here. I have to go. Check by the morgue later, okay? I really think we should discuss this further. There was a sense of urgency in her speech. Yeah, right. Well, why not? She was a lot better looking than his landlady, who was the only other woman he had any kind of relationship with at the moment. And that was limited to her pounding on his door either to ask for the rent or to tell him to turn his crummy music down. I'll call you. Set up an appointment or something, he said. Please, and make it quickly. I have a strange feeling about this. I hear that, he said. She left, and he stared at her. Somebody stopped her just outside the door in the hallway. He couldn't see who, but he heard a man's voice say, Ah, Dr. Weaver, from the coroner's office. You are working on that John Doe jumper, is that right? The speaker had more than a little cracker in him, to judge from his voice. Yes, I'm Dr. Weaver. Why? Look here, Doctor. What is that? There came a bright flash of light, like a lightning strobe. What the hell? Edward started for the door. A man in a black suit and white tie, wearing Ray-Ban shades, stepped in front of the door, blocking it. Evening. You'd be Officer James Edwards, is that right? I am. Who are you? The man in black walked to the video cam inside its steel cage in the corner, pointed what looked like a pen light at it, and pushed a button. There was a little hum, and the video cam's red light went out. He pulled his shades off, pocketed them. Have a seat, son. I'm not your son, and I'm done sitting for the time being. Who are you? Call me Kay, the man said. Someday, huh? Edwards glared at him, but didn't speak. Kay smiled. Want to tell me what happened out there? You some kind of fed? Something like that. How about I tell you a joke instead? You gonna laugh either way. Do I look like somebody with a sense of humor? I don't know. Do I look like a lunatic? Ask anybody around here. My guess is that's what they tell you. Let me see. The guy who fell off the roof had 2 sets of eyelids, the inner set of which were kind of gummy looking. How'd you know that? The inner ones were gills. Gills, like a fish? In a manner of speaking. Let's just let that part slide for now. What else you know about this dude? He jumped like he had his own trampoline on his feet. Edwards felt better. He wasn't crazy, and this dude right here was the proof. No, he had stumbled into something big enough to bring in the feds. Now the trick was how to find out what it was, and who this guy was. What are you, FBI? You ran him down and then kicked his ass? That's pretty amazing, son. You don't know how amazing, I have to tell you. I am impressed, and I don't impress all that easily. CIA, you know about this thing, don't you? I know about a lot of things. Did he say anything before he fell? Some kind of nonsense, something like, he's coming. I failed, he's gonna kill me. Shit like that. That's it? That's it. The weapon he had. You think you'd recognize it if you saw it again? Last time I saw it, it was busted into 1,000,000 pieces. One jigsaw puzzle looks pretty much like the next one when it's unassembled. But you would recognize another one if it wasn't blowed up. I'm a trained police officer. Yeah, I'd recognize it. The man in black stood, smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. Come on, let's take a little ride. I've cleared it with your lieutenant. You are being detached to help us in this matter. National Security Agency? The man in black just grinned wider. Inside the LTD, Kay grinned as the young cop looked around. Come on, man, who you with? Can't be anybody with any money. You driving a piece of crap like this. Kay said, It's a good car. Oh, pardon me, I didn't mean to offend you. I guess I should have remembered an '86 Ford. LTD is a classic and all. He waved at the car. Right up there with cords and boat tail speedsters and all. What your other car? What, your other car is a gremlin? A nice pink Rambler? Things sometimes aren't what they seem, Kay said. I'd have thought you'd have figured that out after today. That shut him up for a second. Then the kid said, Well, I guess that means you aren't a guy who's been doing whatever it is you do for way too long, 'cause that's what you seem like to me. You look kind of burned out. You don't mind me saying so. Kay admired the kid's perception, but he didn't say anything. Struck a chord, didn't I? That's my thing. I'm good on people. Are you? Demonstrate. So who are you? Lay it out, Mr. Man in Black. Kay said, I work for an agency that monitors and polices alien activities here on Earth. That right. Uh-huh. Yeah, sure. Me too. In fact, he stopped as Kay pulled the LTD to the curb. He looked around. This is not the best neighborhood you know to be stopping in. That's Jet Jeeb's pawn shop. Guy buys from two-bit chain grabbers and purse snatchers. Guys who break into tourist cars to swap whatever is on the seat. I know. Dude doesn't deal in guns. You wasting your time here. Maybe not. Let's go in, shall we? No skin off my ass. But I have to tell you, even a piece of junk like this Ford is going to be half gone time we get back. They got boys that can strip it to the frame while you go in to take a leak. I have an alarm system. They can get around any alarm you got, pal. You must not be from around here. This is New York City. They can steal the gold out of your teeth while you're waiting for the subway. I'll take my chances. Edward shrugged. Your car. Don't say I didn't warn you. Kay smiled again. He liked this kid. He was sassy, brash, reminded him of himself 20 years or so ago. He walked around to the trunk, popped it. Go ahead. Go ahead on in. Let Jeeves know we want to have a few words with him, would you? Right. Then you're going to tell me who you are? If you really want to know. Kay watched the kid swagger into the pawn shop, shook his head. Ah, the arrogance of youth. He closed the trunk, pulled the trigger device from his coat pocket, pointed it at the LTD, and pressed the arm button. The Ford peeped at him. He was almost to the door of the pawn shop before the first booster got to the Ford and tried to slim jim the lock. There was a loud pop, and when Kay looked back, all that remained of the would-be car thief was a smoking dark spot on the sidewalk. He grinned. The longer they stayed inside, the safer the cars in this part of the city were going to get. Kay opened the door as he heard another pop and grinned wider as he stepped into the pawn shop. All in the day's work.